In the Torah it is written that a people who forget the covenant will face dispersion among the nations. In the Bible, the Book of Kings describes the fall of the northern kingdom as a consequence of turning away from divine guidance. In the Quran it is said that illegal acts on earth and disobedience lead to humiliation and scattering across lands. Now imagine this moment: a kingdom once chosen, a people once united, a land once promised, and then silence. Before we begin, take a second. If you are someone who seeks truth hidden in history, someone who wants to understand how nations rise and fall, then stay with this story till the end. Because what happened to the northern kingdom is not just history. It is a warning. This is the story of how a nation disappeared. The wind moved slowly across the hills of Samaria. Fields stood quiet. Villages carried a strange tension. Something was coming. Not rumor. Not fear. Something real. For years the northern kingdom of Israel had been weakening from within. Kings rose and fell not by wisdom but by conspiracy. Loyalty was replaced by ambition. Faith was replaced by convenience. And when a nation begins to collapse from inside, it rarely notices the shadow growing outside. To the north, a force was rising. The Neo Assyrian Empire. This was not just another kingdom. This was a machine, organized, ruthless, strategic. It did not just conquer land. It erased identities. Cities fell one after another. Nations were crushed not only by swords but by a new idea. Control through displacement. Assyria understood something the world had not fully realized yet. If you remove people from their land, you remove their memory. If you break their roots, you break their resistance. And Israel was next. Inside the northern kingdom, warnings had already been given. Prophets spoke. Voices rose. They warned of consequences. They warned of moral decay. They warned that alliances built on fear instead of faith would not hold. But people rarely listen when comfort still exists. The markets were still open. The homes still stood. Life looked normal. Until it wasn't. The Assyrian king began his campaign. Not with chaos, with calculation. Border cities were the first to fall. Quick strikes. No mercy. Survivors carried stories back to the capital. Stories of fire, of chains, of entire families taken. Still, many in Israel believed they would survive. They had survived before. They had seen threats come and go. They believed this was just another storm. But this storm did not pass. It consumed. Samaria became the final target. The heart of the northern kingdom. The symbol of its identity. The siege began. Not days. Not weeks. Years. Food became scarce. Water became precious. Fear became constant. Inside the city walls, hope slowly turned into desperation. Imagine waking up each day not knowing if it would be your last. Imagine hearing distant cries. Watching your city shrink not in size but in spirit. This is how nations fall. Not in a single moment, but in a slow crushing of everything that once gave them strength. Outside the walls, the Assyrian army waited. Patient, relentless. They knew time was on their side. Because hunger is stronger than walls. And eventually, the walls broke. When Samaria fell, it was not just a military defeat. It was the end of the northern kingdom. But what came next was something the world had never seen at this scale. Mass exile. Men, women, children. Entire communities were gathered. Not killed. Taken. Taken far away from their land. From their language. From their memories. This was not random cruelty. This was strategy. The Assyrians scattered the Israelites across different parts of their empire. And in their place, They brought people from other conquered lands. This created confusion. It erased identity. It made rebellion nearly impossible. Because when you no longer belong to your land, who are you? This was the beginning of something that would echo for centuries. Diaspora. A word that carries pain, separation, loss, but also transformation. The people of the Northern Kingdom did not just lose their homes. They lost their place in history as a united nation. They became fragments. Some adapted, some resisted, some disappeared into other cultures. Their identity slowly fading with each generation. And the world moved on. But the question remains, how does a chosen nation reach this point? Was it only the power of Assyria? Or was it something deeper? Because history shows us something again and again. No empire falls only because of its enemy. It falls because it was already weakening from within. The Northern Kingdom had warnings. Clear warnings. Corruption in leadership. Division among people. Loss of spiritual direction. These were not small issues. These were cracks in the foundation. And when the Assyrian Empire arrived, it did not create those cracks. It simply broke what was already fragile. Now pause for a moment. Look at the pattern. A powerful empire rises. A smaller nation weakens internally. Warnings are ignored. An external force arrives. Destruction follows. And then displacement. This pattern is not ancient. It is timeless. The Assyrians perfected a method that many powers would later adopt in different forms. Control populations. Move them. Break their unity. Because unity is strength. And broken people are easier to rule. But even in this destruction, something unexpected happened. The idea of identity without land began to form. For the first time, a people had to ask themselves, who are we if we are not in our homeland? This question would shape history in ways no one could imagine at that time. But in this moment, in the ashes of Samaria, there was no philosophy. Only loss. Families separated. Traditions disrupted. Faith tested. Some held on. Others let go. And somewhere in this chaos, the beginning of a long journey started. A journey that would not end for generations. A journey of survival. A journey of memory. A journey of searching for meaning after everything is taken away. But the story does not end here. Because the fall of the Northern Kingdom was not just about Israel. It was also about Assyria. About how power can reshape the world. And about the cost of that power. Because every empire that rises eventually faces its own test. And the methods used to control others often become the seeds of its own downfall. The fall of Samaria was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more calculated. Because the Assyrians were not just conquerors. They were engineers of control. They did not simply destroy nations. They redesigned them. And to understand what happened next, we must step into the mind of an empire that changed the rules of power. The Neo Assyrian Empire stood unlike anything before it. Its kings did not rely only on strength. They relied on systems, intelligence networks, psychological warfare, administrative precision, but above all, they relied on one strategy that would define their dominance. Forced migration. This was not random cruelty. This was a method. When the Assyrians conquered a land, they asked a simple question. How do you prevent rebellion? The answer they discovered was terrifyingly effective. You do not just defeat a people. You uproot them. After the fall of the Northern Kingdom, thousands upon thousands of Israelites were gathered. Not as prisoners of war in chains waiting for execution, but as pieces in a larger plan. They were marched across vast distances, away from familiar mountains, away from known languages, away from shared history. Imagine this. A man who has lived his entire life in one village suddenly finds himself in a foreign land. The language is different. The customs are unfamiliar. The faces are strangers. His children begin to grow in this new land. They learn new words. They adapt to new ways. Slowly, the memory of their original home begins to fade. This is how identity is erased. Not in a single generation, but gradually. The Assyrians did not just remove the Israelites. They replaced them. People from other conquered regions were brought into the land of Israel. They settled in the empty towns. They cultivated the fields. They built new lives. And something remarkable happened. Cultures began to mix. Languages blended. Beliefs overlapped. Traditions merged. But in that mixture, the original identity of the land was altered forever. This was not just exile. This was transformation. The Assyrians had created a system where no single group could easily unite and rise against them. Because everyone was displaced, everyone was adjusting, everyone was trying to survive. And survival leaves little room for rebellion. But this system came with a hidden cost. Because when you move people like pieces on a board, you do not just control them. You change them. Among the exiled Israelites, reactions were not the same. Some resisted internally. They held onto their traditions. They whispered stories of their homeland to their children. They refused to forget. Others adapted quickly. They learned the new ways. They integrated into local societies. For them, survival meant becoming part of something new. And then there were those who were lost in between. Not fully who they were. Not fully what they became. These were the beginnings of what later generations would call the lost tribes. A mystery that would echo through history. Where did they go? What did they become? Did they survive as a people? Or did they dissolve into the vast populations of the Assyrian world? No clear answer remains. Only fragments. But to truly understand this moment, we must also look at the other side. The Assyrian Empire itself. At its peak, it stretched across vast lands. From Mesopotamia to parts of Egypt. It controlled trade routes. It commanded massive armies. It built cities that displayed power and fear in equal measure. Its kings recorded their victories with pride. Walls were carved with scenes of conquest, of enemies defeated, of cities burning. But hidden within these victories was a dangerous pattern. The more the empire expanded, the more it depended on control. The more it depended on control, the more it relied on fear. And fear, while powerful, is never permanent. Forced migration worked. For a time, it kept conquered peoples divided. It reduced large-scale rebellions. It allowed the Assyrians to manage a vast and diverse empire. But it also created something else. Resentment. Across the empire, millions of people were living away from their original homes. Many had lost their identities. Many carried silent anger. And while they may not have rebelled immediately, that anger did not disappear. It waited. This is the paradox of power. The very strategy that strengthens an empire can also plant the seeds of its future weakness. Because control without connection creates distance. And distance weakens loyalty. But at this moment in history, the Assyrians were at their height. They did not see their future decline. They saw only their success. And the story of the northern kingdom seemed finished. A nation erased. A people scattered. A land transformed. But history rarely ends so cleanly. Because even in exile, ideas survive. Faith survives. Memory survives. Among the scattered Israelites, something continued. A sense of belonging that was not tied only to land. A belief that identity could exist even without territory. This was a shift. Before this, most nations understood themselves through geography. Their land defined them. Their borders shaped their identity. But now, a new idea was forming. What if a people could exist beyond their land? What if identity could travel? This idea would later shape entire civilizations. But in this moment, it was fragile. It existed in stories told quietly, in traditions practiced secretly, in prayers whispered in foreign lands. And this quiet resistance became a different kind of strength. Not the strength of armies, but the strength of memory. Meanwhile, the land of Israel itself was no longer what it once was. New populations lived there. New dynamics formed. The old unity was gone. And the northern kingdom as a political entity ceased to exist. But its story did not disappear. It became a warning, a lesson, a moment in history that would be remembered and retold in different ways. Because what happened here was not just about one nation. It was about a method, a strategy of empire, and a question that continues even today. Can a people survive without their land? Or does exile eventually erase everything? The story of the Northern Kingdom does not end with exile. In many ways, that is where its real story begins. Because destruction is loud, but what comes after is quiet. And it is in that silence that history takes its deepest turns. The Israelites who were scattered across the Assyrian Empire did not vanish in a single moment. They lived, they worked, they raised families, they adapted to lands that were not theirs. But something inside them remained unsettled. A memory, not always clear, not always strong, but present. A memory of a land they once called home. A memory of a covenant they once carried. A memory of who they were supposed to be. And here is where the story becomes more than history. Because this moment forced a question that humanity had never fully faced before. What defines a people? Is it their land? Is it their language? Is it their power? Or is it something deeper? For the Northern Kingdom, all the visible markers of identity were taken away. Their cities were gone. Their political system was erased. Their unity was broken, and yet traces of identity remained. Some communities held tightly to their traditions. They preserved what they could. They told their children stories not just to remember the past, but to protect it. Others slowly blended into surrounding cultures. Their identity faded, not through force, but through time. This is how disappearance truly happens. Not always through violence, but through forgetting. And this is why the story of the lost tribes remains one of the greatest mysteries in history. Because it is not just about where they went. It is about what they became. Did they survive in hidden forms? Did they influence other civilizations without being recognized? Or did they simply dissolve into the vast ocean of humanity? History does not give a clear answer. But it gives us something else. Patterns. And if we follow those patterns, we begin to see something powerful. The fall of the Northern Kingdom was not an isolated event. It was part of a larger design unfolding in the ancient world. The rise of empires that did not just conquer land, but reshaped populations. The Assyrians were the first to scale this strategy with precision. But they were not the last. Later empires would use similar methods. Move populations, break unity, control identity. Because once you understand that identity is power, you begin to control it. And yet, despite all of this, something unexpected kept happening throughout history. People survived, not always as they were, but in some form. Ideas survived, beliefs survived, Stories survived. And sometimes, those stories became stronger in exile than they ever were in comfort. This is the paradox. Exile destroys, but it also transforms. It forces a people to redefine themselves, to ask deeper questions, to hold onto what truly matters and let go of what does not. For the descendants of those who experienced exile, identity became less about place and more about meaning. And this shift would shape the future in ways the Assyrians could never have predicted. Because while they succeeded in controlling land, they could not fully control memory. And memory is powerful. It moves across generations. It adapts. It survives. But now, step back and look at the bigger picture. The northern kingdom ignored warnings. It weakened from within. It faced an external force. It fell. Its people were scattered. Now ask yourself, how different is this from today? Nations still rise and fall. Societies still face internal division. Warnings are still ignored. Powerful forces still reshape populations. The methods may look different, but the pattern remains. Even today, we see forced migrations. We see people leaving their homes due to conflict, politics, or survival. We see identities being challenged and redefined. And just like in the past, the question remains the same. What happens to a people when they are removed from their roots? Some rebuild, some adapt, some struggle to hold onto who they are, and some are forgotten. This is why this story matters. Not because it is ancient, but because it is repeating. Now think about the Assyrian Empire. At its height, it seemed unstoppable. It controlled vast territories. It had powerful armies. It had a system that worked. But history tells us something important. No empire lasts forever. The same empire that mastered control eventually faced its own decline. Enemies rose. Internal pressures increased. The structure that once seemed unbreakable began to crack. And eventually, the Assyrian Empire fell. The power that scattered others was itself scattered. This is the final lesson. Power is temporary. Control is limited. And strategies built only on dominance carry within them the seeds of their own end. But the human story continues. Long after empires fall. Long after cities turn to dust, what remains are the choices people make. To remember or to forget. To hold onto identity or to let it fade. To learn from history or to repeat it. The northern kingdom fell, but its story did not end. It became a warning carried through generations. A reminder that strength without unity is fragile. That power without purpose is dangerous. And that ignoring truth comes at a cost. So now, as you hear this story, ask yourself one final question. If the same patterns appear again, will we recognize them? Or will history repeat itself once more? If this story made you think, if it opened your eyes to patterns hidden in history, then stay connected. Because there are more stories like this. Stories that are not just about the past, but about understanding the world we live in today. This was not just the fall of a kingdom. This was the beginning of a reality that still shapes us. And this is only one chapter of the journey of humanity.